Hi, this is Kara from the Special Needs Mom podcast.
And this is Angela from Especially Organized, Sensible Solutions for Special Needs Moms.
We have this heart for special needs moms. And so we thought, you know what, let's combine forces. And we have come up with what we're calling the Purge Party. And you can pretty much guess what it is. It's a party where we're going to come together and we're going to purge or, in general, accomplish a goal, a small goal together. So we have set this for January 27th, starting at 8 o'clock for my Pacific Coast people.
Which means 11 o'clock for all of you on the East Coast. So this is an opportunity. If you have something on your to-do list that has just been stuck there and you are wanting to move it up on the list, you're wanting to tackle, maybe it's a space or an area of your home or a category in your home that has just needed a little time and attention. This is your opportunity for you to be online with us while you work and have access for us to help you answer your questions, help guide you, and just serve you for those 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can tell like what we've designed is just this very high level of support for that project that you just haven't been able to tackle on your own. The thing that we are envisioning is that you get to leave this purge party feeling so accomplished because you did the thing. You started the year off getting that thing done that you were stuck on last year. And so it's a momentum builder, if you will. You can go ahead and sign up. We have a link ready for you. And we are offering this for $40 for the whole experience.
Absolutely. And we hope you'll join us. I think it's going to be really fun. It's going to be a great group of moms of special needs kids. So we all get each other. We all have an understanding of what it's like to have something on our to-do list, but just we haven't been able to tackle it yet. So I hope that you will join us. We're super excited to bring this to you, and we are thrilled to work with you.
All right. We'll see you all there. Hi, I'm Kara, life coach, wife, and mom to 4 incredible and unique children. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and confidence that once felt so lacking. I created the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves feeling trapped and with no one who really understands. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle your ability to dream. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you are a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome. Hello and welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast. I'm so glad you're here. And what I know is that you all know what it's like to have to pivot. And today's episode was originally scheduled for a little later in the year, but I had to pivot. I was in the shower a couple days ago and I had anticipated recording a solo episode for you that I'm really excited to bring to you. And I was thinking to myself, you've got to let go of this one. You've got to let go of like exactly how you wanted it to be and how you had kind of thought through everything to what is easiest for you right now. And so I'm really proud of myself for doing that. And also it's a win-win because the guest I have today, she's a powerhouse, but more about her later. I'll tell you a little bit behind the scenes of why I had to pivot. And overall, it's good news because I have the privilege of painting my kitchen cabinets. Well, really hiring somebody to do that work. But it's like really disrupting my life. I know that if you have gone through any sort of construction or remodel in your home, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And just this weekend was full of preparing to have the painters come. Way underestimated how long that would take. And so therefore, like I said earlier, I had to let go of it. But you know what? I trust it's all in perfect timing. So let's talk a little bit about this week's episode. It's a juicy one. This conversation is with Amy Neyer. She is a friend that I met, a now friend. I met her earlier this year at the We Are Brave Together retreat in San Diego, which I had the fortune of leading. And she is just somebody that is, I was thinking about this, she's a really good listener. And that's a skill I think that is really underappreciated these days. She's also a great talker, as you're here. And she's really got a beautiful way of sharing the whole story, not just sharing the pretty afterwards, but sharing the whole journey. And I think those of you that have been here a while know that I'm really all about sharing the whole story, not just about the pretty, happy rainbow ending that, some of us make it to at some point. I'm not sure. Okay, so she is a physical therapist. She earned her doctorate of physical therapy from Mount St. Mary's and now currently lives in the LA area with her husband and son. And like I said earlier, what I love about her is that she shares where she's come from, where she is now, and where she still wants to go in terms of her experience as a mom of a child with medical complexities. We talk about tools that have helped her. And I think it's going to be a conversation that you're going to both relate to and feel like, wow, I'm not alone in this. But also, I think you're going to leave with some resources. So we're going to talk about those. Anything we mentioned in the episode will, of course, be linked in the show notes. And specifically, what we talk about is this thing we're calling hyper responsibility. And as you listen to the episode, I'm pretty certain that you're going to relate to this. You're going to relate to it at a high level. Listen up to what has helped Amy and consider leaning a little further in what you're already doing to support yourself and or using Amy as a launch point for trying something to support yourself. Now, before we start the episode, I do want to mention Pathway to Peace. Hopefully you would have heard about it in the introduction before the show got started, but I know we all kind of get used to those introductions and start to ignore them. So I want to make sure that you don't miss the opportunity to join the fall cohort. We're in a new season. And if you're like me, you're ready to exhale, ready to slow down again, to really sink into like, okay, we're in a new season. I can kind of shift from having the summer been all about just getting through with my kids and sustaining all the things that I was committed to, and shift a little bit more focus over back on me. And I know that this is something that is really difficult for a lot of us, that it feels like it's either my kids or me. And I'm not willing to give up what my kids need, so I will just have to suffer. And I am here to say it does not have to be that way. You like that rhyme? So I'm going to teach you how to do this in this program, and it's packed with resources. And yet, as good as the resources are, I think the real magic is the community. It's the community working together, going towards the same goal together. It's like putting what you could do on your own on steroids, because there is such power in watching another woman do the same thing that you're attempting to do and push through that resistance the same that you have. It's like we fuel each other, we inspire each other, but in a very tangible way that feels very accessible and not overly lofty. And so I want you to consider that these relationships, these tools and resources, these shifts that you experience in this program will stay with you for the rest of your life. And I would love to have a conversation with you, really understanding what you're looking for, who you are, and if this program is right for you right now. So the way I do that is I have conversations. It's a small, intimate group. The good news is that allows me to support you at a very high level and to be very, very connected to the community. Take a second, click on the link to the show notes, and then you'll find a way to schedule some time with me. So don't delay, because we're getting started. You don't want to miss out on the beginning, and it's going to be really fun. So my promise to you is that it will be deep, it will be meaningful, but we also have fun along the way. All right, let's get into the episode. Well, hello, Amy. And welcome
Hello.
to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to finally be here.
I know. Very fun. Well, let's jump right in. I want to hear it from your own lips, a little bit more about you. Just give me a little sense of, what's your jam?
What's my jam? That's a good question. So I'm born and raised Southern California. I went to UCLA. I live in the South Bay, which is near LAX in Los Angeles. I love being outdoors. I love the ocean. My husband and I swim in the ocean. We try to go once a week. I think I love the mountains and the ocean equally. I love greenery. I love going up to the mountains,
Have you
especially.
been to Big Sur?
Oh, yes.
Oh, it's like, that's the best.
Oh,
I was like, that's the best of both worlds. Anyhow,
it is
so
the best of both worlds.
all
Yes.
y'all that aren't in California, or for some odd reason don't know about Big Sur, it is where I think there's a saying for it. What's the saying? Isn't there a saying? Like basically the
It's where
ocean
like
meets
the
the
ocean meets
forest.
the, yeah,
And there's a
I like
scary
that.
cliffy road that I don't like, but it is so gorgeous. It's one of the most gorgeous places.
Yeah,
And anyhow, continue on.
exactly. No, I mean, I think that being from California, and I really appreciate everything about the outdoors, and it's where I ground myself and where I just feel my most calm. See, after UCLA, some time passed, I went to Mount St. Mary's College, which is now Mount St. Mary's University, for physical therapy school. And I always knew I wanted to do neuro physical therapy.
Did you
So,
always know you wanted to be a physical therapist?
no, I thought I wanted to be a physician, something neuro. I always loved the brain. Then I realized when I was in college that I wanted a career that would be a little bit more flexible and that I could start sooner. I didn't really feel like doing the whole residency fellowship route. And it was my husband who was at the time my boyfriend. And he said, I think physical therapists have a really high satisfaction in their careers. You should look into that. And I really hadn't thought about it. But then I got a job as a PT aide and I started volunteering. And it was definitely the right move. I've worked with people who have had strokes. I've worked with brain injury. I've worked spinal cord injury, mostly right after the injury, like in the hospital. And I've worked in the hospital also doing like post-surgical orthopedics, like hip replacements and post-heart surgeries, things like that. Now I'm doing neuro PT in an outpatient clinic, working with people who have movement disorders like Parkinson's, and then also working with people who have rare and or complex nervous system disorders. And that is my jam. I love it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I mean, I'm just going to say it. You're like a pretty big deal in the PT world. She's very, very well recognized as incredible. So
thank you.
Now let's kind of look at another part of you, you as a mom, and tell us a little bit about your family, your child, I guess, and then tell us a little bit about your becoming as you stepped in from being a mom into also being a special needs mom.
Right. So my husband and I had, my husband's John. We had David is my son, and we had him in 2015. So he just turned 8. My husband comes from a very big family. He's the oldest of 9. And I come from a small family. I'm the youngest of 2. And we decided we were going to probably have 4 was like our compromise, right?
I like that. Like meet in the middle.
Yeah. Meet in the middle. And when my son was born, it was uncomplicated birth. He was very planned for, very loved. And honestly, day 1 in the hospital, I had a feeling that something was wrong. And so my special needs mothering journey started day 1 with people basically telling me you're an over anxious mom. And that was the start of my journey that had kind of continued even to this day. Being dismissed and having your concerns not be heard started day 1 for me. I'm a healthcare professional, but I don't work with babies. And this was my first baby. But even then I thought, well, that doesn't seem right. This isn't typical. And I would ask questions in a more inquisitive way. I didn't think I sounded overly anxious. And people would just dismiss, oh, it's fine. It's fine. So essentially, we had a few weeks where things seemed relatively okay and normal, but he did have a lot of reflux. And I guess that's something that occurs in some babies, but his got worse and worse. Pretty much from the time he was 6 weeks old, he was on medicine for it. And then by the time he was 3 months old, he stopped gaining weight. And when he was 5 months old, it was our first time seeing specialists. And then it just kind of went from there. He has several rare conditions that tend to come together. One of them is called mast cell activation syndrome, MCAS. That is an immunological condition in which the body has allergic reactions or allergic type reactions to anything, everything. When he was a baby, primarily it was food, my breast milk, anything I ate that was through my breast milk. He also has a condition called hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or HEDS, connective tissue in the body that is very hypermobile, very, very flexible. But it also, it's not just the joints; it also affects the internal organs. Any place that there's connective tissue, his is very affected and doesn't hold organs together as well, and so that affects him the most in his GI tract. He has a feeding tube as a result of those two conditions. He hasn't been formally diagnosed with dysautonomia, although it's likely that he has it. They just don't tend to diagnose children with it. But basically what that means is that a part of its nervous system doesn't act appropriately at times. So it can make his heart rate go up very high. When he was a baby, he would run around, not a baby, like a toddler, he'd be running around and spike a fever just by running. And I think that his dysautonomia is also related to his digestive issues as well. So it's all kind of tied together. Now we're looking at some possible other neurologic conditions that might be underlying some other things we're seeing, but just a new part of the journey to better understand him and to better support his needs. He is also autistic and has selective mutism, in which he speaks directly to 4 people. He has anxiety, and I think his anxiety is primarily due to his medical trauma and the lack of control of his body. So that's like a list of his conditions, but as a person, he is absolutely like the most brilliant person I've ever met. He has a memory that puts mine to shame. He loves games. He loves mazes. He loves to draw his own mazes, and he calls himself an amazing maze maker.
I love that.
He really is.
He's got to write a book and work with that title, or make a maze book, an amazing book. Get it?
He has. Okay. Oh yeah, our house is
You're like,
filled
it's already
with
done.
books. Yeah. Oh, he loves to draw. His nickname is Doodles because he loves to doodle. His classmates love his doodles, and he's super, super bright and inquisitive. Like when kids go through their why stage, like why, he genuinely wants to know why and never ever left the why stage. He wants to know why to everything. And he is absolutely a joy to have around. He's so fun. He loves music. He loves to listen to his playlist on Spotify, and he loves to travel, airplanes, airports. That's his favorite.
Wow. He does sound like a dream. And I know it's not always easy. There's obviously, a lot of things.
Yeah.
But I love that you acknowledged that who he is separate from a list of his diagnoses. Your wording really struck me, and I like the way that you differentiated that. So now let's turn to you. He's, gone through all the years. Now he's 8. You had that hunch in the beginning, and, you went through the whole series that many of us have gone through, where you're learning more, you're dealing with like the unknown. There's a lot of fear involved. When you look back over I guess the entirety of his life, what are the parts that stick out to you the most as you look back from where you're at now?
Well, I think the early stages, like when he was a baby, I don't think anything could have ever prepared me for that level of fear and the unknown and not having any guidance. We were luckily hooked up with one of the most phenomenal GI doctors who we're still with to this day. She has saved his life on multiple occasions and is amazing. And even she didn't really quite know what was going on initially. And he wasn't responding well even to the medicines at first. And he was just very sick on my breast milk. So the early days of just desperately trying to eliminate foods from my diet so that he could survive. He would start gaining weight. He would eventually turn a corner, and that didn't happen. And then trying to get him on a formula, any hypoallergenic formula that he could tolerate, and that didn't happen. And so it was just, he couldn't tolerate pretty much anything we were trying to do. And it was just a very scary time. And
Mhm.
his medicines were compounded. They still are pure powder and water. And they, at the time, were not covered by insurance. So we couldn't afford them,
Mhm.
but we had to
Mhm.
figure out a way to do that. And I
Mm.
think that when we finally got him onto, we ended up working with a dietitian who helped us create a modular formula with a hypoallergenic amino acid powder, water, sugar, and olive oil.
Mhm.
And we tried our best to blend it. It turns out olive oil and water don't blend very well. Who knew? But that was his formula from the time he was about
Mm.
9 months old until he was a little over 2 years old. And
Mm.
he did gain weight on it. And so we were able to get him off my breast milk. And I think beyond the fear, there was a lot of shame, a lot of
Mm.
feeling like I should be able to feed my kid, and responsibility, feeling overly responsible for that when it wasn't my fault. So that was a very key time in our journey. I also think back to when he was 2.5 to 3. That was a challenging time in a lot of different ways. So he had just received his feeding tube. He had surgery when he was a little over 2, and we were able to transition him to a different formula that wasn't made from olive oil and sugar and water. And he tolerated the switch. But around that time, he started having behaviors that were really concerning. He didn't want me around at all. And
Mm.
it was more than just what you read about with like parent preference.
Mhm.
If I walked in his room in the morning, he would scream bloody murder until I left.
Mm.
Wouldn't get ready with me in the morning. If he was playing a game with his dad and I walked in the room, like he didn't want me in the room. Then we were seeing some other behaviors, like if something didn't work out the way he wanted it to work out, he would kind of like punish himself and like put a toy away instead of like working
Mm.
through it. He would like, especially when he was around 3, like I can't have that. He was in OT before, but we like ramped up the OT. We started seeing a child psychologist who was really trauma informed, and
Mhm.
saw him and his needs not as, autism or something to be fixed, but just like this is a child with a lot of medical trauma, and how
Mhm.
can we meet him where he's at? So that was a huge turning point for us. I realized I didn't know how to engage with him
Mhm.
as the type of mother he needed.
Mm.
I just didn't understand how he was perceiving the world, how the world was to him. And so I think that there were maybe ways that I learned how to engage with him. I learned how to play with him in a way that I just didn't really know before. And so it was a really cool journey for me working with his psychologist and doing play therapy, him and me. And she was in the room kind of guiding and directing. That was a big turning point, like a really huge time in our lives, just kind of coming together as a family.
Mhm.
And he was finally on the feeding tube and finally on this formula. And we reached sort of a little bit of a groove. I don't think we've ever really been in a groove, but as much as you're going to get one,
Mhm. Mhm.
with how quickly things change. And then I think the last big one was last year. His formula was recalled from the market. I mean, just overnight, we didn't have a nutrition source for him.
Mhm.
So that was scary, but I didn't want to project that fear onto him. So he was just, kind of going around his business. I'm working with the dietitian and with the GI doctor, trying new formulas, giving him lots of Benadryl to help him tolerate the new
Mm.
formula. And he did tolerate it. He tolerated the switch to something else, and his body started feeling better.
Mm.
And he started, for the first time in his life, he was almost 7. He wanted to start eating food by mouth. And so a whole new wave of fear, because I was like, well, the last time you tried that, like things did not go well. But I didn't want to like make him afraid of food. And he
Right.
never really showed much interest. So
Mhm.
now that he was showing interest, I'm just like, okay, sure, have the chocolate chip cookie that has eggs and flour, chocolate in it. Like it was so absurd to me. But he also didn't know how to chew or swallow. So he wasn't eating a whole bunch of it. He's like taking
Yeah.
tiny nibbles. But he was feeling well enough to try. And each day he would have like a little nibble, a little bit more. We put a mirror in front of him so he could like watch what his mouth was doing. And now, over a year later, he's still fully G-tube dependent on his formula for nutrition, but he's trying new things. He's tolerating a lot of what he's trying, and things are like just less scary when it comes to food. So I feel like we're in this new stage.
Yeah. I mean, I just think there's so many legitimate fears that you have had to navigate through his whole life. And so for you to kind of be at a place where those particular fears seem to be less threatening, it's great to see that part alleviated a little bit.
Yeah.
To give you some space for all the other things.
All the other things.
All the other things.
Exactly.
I remember you sharing the story about the formula being recalled. And I mean, just the idea of cutting somebody out from their food source. I mean, if you look at it for you or I, like how that would be. And it's like almost like incomprehensible. Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I don't think it's an assumption to say we've all become new people along this journey. And so my assumption is that that's the same for you. As you look back at these seasons, these moments, and even where you are now, what do you feel like are the things that helped you the most in some of those really fragile seasons?
Well, I think that I got into therapy. I started seeing a psychologist when my son was little. Pretty much within a few weeks of him being born, my anxiety was like sky high because I knew something was wrong. No one was listening to me. And I just felt like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be returning to work and I'm not ready to do that. I can't leave him. I just knew I couldn't. And I just thought it was postpartum anxiety. I started seeing a psychologist who was like, yeah, we'll work through this. This is very normal. I'm so glad you're here. And then, week by week, we're like, nope, I'm not stopping. This is, there's a lot going on. I was also very lucky because my psychologist is also a special needs mom. And so she knew some stuff that I didn't even know she knew. I think having a place to help process anxiety, very validating person in my life who would just, listen to me, and I knew she had my back. I knew she understood me. My husband also has that same place for me as well. He is my partner in this, although our experiences are really quite different. And I don't know if he really even can ever fully understand the trauma of like not being able to breastfeed my kid successfully when like my milk was making my son sick. He can hear me and be there for me, but that's something that, unless you've been there, it's just a very unique situation. But I do have, people I can rely on and people I can talk to that has helped throughout. And then I was introduced to meditation by my psychologist. She was funny. It was like the months leading up to my son's feeding tube surgery. And she's like, so normally I give suggestions and ideas, but this is not really a suggestion. You need to do this.
She's like, it's actually a demand. I will make sure you do this no matter what. I love it.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on this. And so she wanted me to read a book by John Kabat-Zinn called Full Catastrophe Living. And then she said, download some apps. Let's find something that's like short, like a couple minutes a day, just something to get you started. That book, Full Catastrophe Living, really was very just life-changing. It helped me in being able to tolerate just being in the present moment, not feeling I have to fix everything all the time, because I'm a fixer. I'm a physical therapist. I am also a people pleaser, and like I got to get to the root of the issue and fix the problem, and that's not always possible with my child. More tolerance for the unknown and for the discomfort of simply being. And I remember when we were in the hospital for his feeding tube surgery, and I continued my practice. I was doing 5 minutes a day, and that was so helpful. I was also doing yoga back then. I'm not currently doing yoga, but I think movement in general has been a really great outlet for me, whether it's running or swimming or yoga or weightlifting or, anything just to move my body. That's been great for my nervous system. And also knowing other moms in this community and connecting with other moms, like how we met at retreat. And, we're busy. It's hard to like have those strong connections and maintain them during the weeks because we're all just like in it. But just knowing that there are other women who get it, who I can connect with when it's possible, that has been huge.
Yeah, I would agree that being connected, feeling like you have people to reach out to you in those moments, and just knowing that somebody else out there understands. I'll add this funny little story. So one of the things that we've had to do this year is to put locks on our refrigerator. And for the reason that my son is food seeking. And so he's not able to regulate. I mean, a lot of kids are not able to regulate, let's be honest, but his is at the point where it's not safe for him.
Yeah.
And so we have locks on our refrigerator and I kind of hate them. I mean, it's not a preference that I would have. And I also wonder what people think when they come to our house. Like we have people working at the house. I'm like, it must be like, wow, this lady's really, really strict about the diet. Dear. Because our pantry has a lock too. But I have a very close friend who also has locks on her refrigerator.
Yeah.
And I just can think of her and be like, Jessica's got this. Like she knows. And I can call her and I can tell her about how upset I was that I'm going to have to put locks on my brand new refrigerator and it's going to make it ugly. And while that's first world problem, and it still makes me upset. It's frustrating. Yes, I concur. Yeah. Wow. You shared so many like really insightful things, and particularly that book title. I'm like, that sounds like one I want to read.
You should. It's so good. I love the audiobook too. I've listened to it 2 times and it is so good. John Kabat-Zinn is amazing.
Sorry, another side story. One of my professors in college who taught turf management, so like managing grass. Yes, I studied plants. His name was Dr. Green. And I'm just like, I mean, come on. It's great. Okay, so I just wanted to mention to everybody, we'll put links to that book so you can easily find it. If you want to dive into that as like a self-guided resource, it sounds like it would be really, really valuable. I want to jump back to something that you had shared earlier, and that is about this responsibility piece. And you and I have talked a little bit about this together before. And, you shared today about like, you really struggled in those early stages with that responsibility and understanding like what you could change and what you couldn't change and how you can impact things. And I just kind of want to set the scene a little bit for like, how do you experience that? We'll call it hyper responsibility. How do you experience that and how does it show up in your life?
Yeah, it shows up a lot. Again, I like to fix the things. There's times where I feel like, no, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm, at peace with what is. I'm going to let things be. And in a lot of ways, I can't let go of responsibility because my son wouldn't be okay. And so that's where the struggle comes in. There are times where I probably don't have to feel so responsible. I used to say or feel like, oh, I did that thing or I said that thing and I triggered a meltdown. I was like, I was responsible for triggering that meltdown. I love one of the things my therapist said that really stuck with me. She's like, Amy, the meltdown was going to happen. Like, oh yeah, it didn't matter that you did that thing or you moved the chair that way or like, no, it would have been something else. The meltdown was coming. And that really gave me such freedom to not feel like I was the one, like, I know I don't have to walk on eggshells in my home. I can be respectful to my son and his nervous system and try to create an environment which is as supportive of him as possible. But I myself, I'm not causing a meltdown. And I've done a lot of growth in that way. Early on, I felt so responsible for him not gaining weight, where really what the issue was his body wasn't absorbing food and nutrients. And even to this day, we still see some issues with absorption and his nutrition, but it's much better now. Where it's really challenging is when a new thing pops up or a new symptom arrives. And I feel like if I am not on top of it, nothing is going to get done. And that's actually the reality. So this past winter, we were seeing some new concerning symptoms. And I messaged his doctor right away and she agreed, yeah, that is concerning. We'll have to keep an eye on that. But it wasn't in her specialty. This was not a GI issue. So then I thought, gosh, this is getting worse. We need to see somebody about this. Well, he has rare conditions. And so we need to see somebody who understands those rare conditions so that these symptoms can be looked at in the context of his conditions. And there are doctors that don't believe hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos exists. There are doctors that don't think mast cell activation syndrome exists. And so I can't go to those doctors.
They wouldn't be as helpful. I agree with that.
That would not be the place to go. So I was doing all the research of, okay, well, I'm a PT and I work with this population. Like, I know the people, I'll figure it out. And I'm calling around and I'm emailing and I'm reaching out and I'm getting nothing. So now what? So now I reach out to his primary physician at the time, who was like, great, I'll put in a referral for the specialist at UCLA. Great, thank you so much. Does that doctor know anything about EDS and MCAS? No. Okay, so it's probably not the first place we should start, and so I'm the one driving the ship. And I was told he's going to need a spinal cord MRI. Well, I don't want him to have a spinal cord MRI because I don't want him to have to go under anesthesia. Like, I don't want to put him through that. But in order to have the MRI, he has to be under. So I'm now responsible for making this happen somehow, even though I don't want it to happen. And if I just said, screw it, I'm not doing it, it would never have happened because no one was driving this. His doctor, the local hospital, like, she put the order in so that it could be done at the hospital that he's had procedures and surgeries at in the past. Local hospital, they know him there, his medical records are there, but we didn't have a neurologist there. We didn't have a neurosurgeon there. And no one on that staff was like going to be knowledgeable in his condition. So while I had support, I was really responsible for making this happen. And every time he had new symptoms pop up, and they were intermittent, right? So they kind of go away for a couple of weeks. I'm like, oh, this phase is done. And then boom, it would happen again. I'm like, never mind. And it felt like just a punch in the gut every time. And time is ticking and I have to make this happen. Then we had insurance challenges. And then when we finally got it scheduled, there was more insurance challenges. And then up to the day before the MRI, they didn't schedule the anesthesiologist. And no one would have known that, but I knew that we didn't get a pre-op phone call and that we should have gotten a pre-op phone call. And I'm like, well, I know we've been here before. We've done this. We've had MRIs before. So I said, where's the pre-op phone call? They're like, no, it's MRI. It's different. Don't worry. Just show up tomorrow at 6 a.m. And I just called as many departments as I could get a hold of and finally figured out they never scheduled the anesthesiologist, which means we would have shown up the next morning and not had the MRI. And so the whole thing was just validating that I do have to be hyper responsible. If I didn't call them, at least 20 times over the 2 months leading up to it, it wouldn't have happened. There were so many ways it was falling apart. And I think that I wanted to just let go. I wanted to just let it be, let the medical system work and not be feeling so responsible for figuring out what's going on. But that unfortunately isn't the way the system is. And when you don't have a condition that is so well known, there are programs at some of the major children's hospitals for some conditions, like, cancer. I would never wish cancer upon my son. So I'm not like, I hope that doesn't come across that way. But you enter a hospital with a cancer diagnosis, they're making appointments for you. Like, you have everything set up for you.
And I can say firsthand, the experience in HEMOC is, it's like first class service. It's so great compared to other departments.
And I know that you've been in this situation where you're like, there's a new symptom. It's not cancer anymore. So now you're in this world of like, you need to figure it out. Yeah. Even just to know what specialist to go to and finding the specialist and who takes your insurance. There's so much there. Meanwhile, okay, let me try to get him back into physical therapy. Let me try, and it's on top of everything. It's really, really, really hard to not feel hyper responsible because in reality, I have to be.
I want to break this down because I think you're highlighting a very real experience that I am very well connected to what you're describing. I'm experiencing it too. And what I notice is that it makes me really mad. It makes me really, really mad. Why? Because I feel like a victim and I feel powerless because I'm trying my darnest. I feel like I'm pretty competent and it's not working. And so there's this dynamic where we know we want to persist because we want to get the help for our child, yet it's very hard when you hit so many roadblocks and barricades, etc. And I'll come back to this in a little bit, but I think the opportunity for us, all of us, both you and I and everybody listening, is to constantly notice the relationship we're having to what's happening and to check ourselves. If we are kind of falling into the role of it's happening to me, I don't have any choice, versus recognizing, okay, this is what's happening. This is who I am. This is what I'm choosing to do. It doesn't necessarily change the things that you're going to have to do. Like you're still going to have to call, but it does change how we feel significantly. And so I want to jump back to the question I was going to ask you. And given this scenario, right? Like it's like this hyper responsibility, this persistent, I'm going to even say like, what's the word? Overacting way of being that you've described. I mean, there's upsides, right? You get shit done, but there's some downsides. And what do you see for yourself? What are the downsides? What does this cost to have this hyper responsibility?
Well, the downside is burnout, absolute, total, utter burnout. And, this is an example that I really needed to be so hyper responsible in order to get things to actually happen. But the feeling of being hyper responsible over when his symptoms arise, I want to fix the issue, but that can't be. I can't fix the issue. I can help him through the moment. I can comfort him. I can make sure he's okay after the fact, lay down with him and repair after, he's had whatever has happened. That's what I can do. I can control that. And that doesn't lead to burnout. Just being there for my child, that doesn't lead to burnout. But feeling like, what could I have done? What did I miss? Did something happen yesterday? Did I give him that instead? Like that is crazy making, honestly. And I know there's probably a way better way of saying that, but
yeah, actually, I'm going to summarize maybe in a little bit different words, but I think you've highlighted something really important. And yeah, I think burnout is kind of the obvious conclusion to this. And I think we've all been there, right? Like we've all been to this point where I can't go on. I'm so sick of this. It does wear you down.
Yeah.
And you were just talking about the experience of like kind of trying to fix something that ultimately you did not have the authority to fix, or that I would use the word agency. And so there's this dynamic in which I think this hyper responsibility tries to control that which is not controllable.
Yes.
And that'll make you real crazy, as you're saying, like, because you're trying to do something that is literally impossible. Like, let's just say you were trying to heal his syndrome. I don't know that you have authority over that. And as you try to do that and as you're attached to that and you wear yourself out doing that, like that is not a happy life.
Exactly. And I think even going back to when he was a baby, we didn't know. We didn't know what's going on. I was told by multiple lactation consultants, it's the way you're holding him. That's why he's throwing up. It's his latch because of the way that you are positioning him. It was me, right? It's because you're eating eggs. It's because you're eating soy. So I was being fed all this information that it's on me. I can change this. And over the years, when new symptoms arise, it's not because of me. It's because of his conditions. And I think sometimes we get kind of wrapped up in, oh my gosh, did I do the thing? Or what did I could have given him that medicine. But then taking a step back and checking in periodically, because no one in the right mind would say like, your child has an issue. You're not just going to accept it and move on. Like, no, you're going to try to like help your kid. So at some point you're going to like, first try some things. And then when you realize you've done what you can do, then finding peace in that place and moving forward. And then when the next episode hits, an episode can be like a new diagnosis or a change in symptoms, because it's never the same. It's always like changing. Okay. So like when my son stopped speaking, he was not the most verbal child, but he would talk to pretty much everybody in his circle. And then the pandemic happened, and then he stopped speaking to everybody except for 4 people. And so I thought, okay, I could help him with this. I can help him with that. We're going to try this. We're going to try that. And it wasn't working. Nothing was helping him feel comfortable speaking. And so then once we realized we did all the things, and I have the speech therapist and I have the OT and the psychologist, okay, this is where he's at right now. So what does he need? Oh, he needs assistive device to help him with communication in school. Okay, that's what we can do next.
Mm-hmm.
So not like forcing him to talk, because there's no forcing him to talk.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my fault that he's not talking. It's just, it is. This is what it is right now. And finding peace in what is, knowing that you tick the boxes, that you did what you can do, but still respecting who your child is and where they're at. It's a lot easier to do when it's like something that's not medically terrifying.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that finding those moments, like checking in with yourself, okay, can I let go now? Can I just be here now and gather the resources of what we need to be in this moment now, instead of like seeking and searching and trying to fix? And there's no going back. There's just moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've done a great job of really describing the experience of acceptance. When we accept, it's almost like it's the door, it's the gateway into being able to come from the place that you were just describing, of being able to say, okay, he's not speaking. What does he need? He needs a device. You've danced in like, okay, like I can do this. I can do this. I'm going to try this. Like I see things I can do. Yet it was inside of the acceptance, I think, that allowed you to continue to persist, but not in a way that was like, I have to. And if I don't, then it was like, okay, this is how I want to help my son. So you said a little bit ago, you get to this point where you can recognize that you've done what you needed to do. And then you can look around and be like, okay, now I can just rest in the peace and allow what is.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about your experience of how you distinguish the difference between what you have done, as in like your work is done, versus you continuing to push and to strive.
Oh, that is such a good question. So I think ultimately in my journey, I have reached a level of acceptance of his condition. This is not something that's going away. These are chronic, like my son is my son. He is not going to like one day magically not have these conditions. They're part of him. And so that acceptance does help in a lot of ways, just because, you know, when you have a baby and you don't know that these are chronic conditions, then there's a lot more room for feeling like you can fix the thing.
Good point. Yeah.
And maybe in some cases there are things that can be fixed or addressed and, you know, treated. And so in our day-to-day life, especially when something new pops up, I think that I have truths to hold on to. So the truths I hold on to, and have gotten easier to return to rely on these truths as I've been in this journey longer, but we have always found a solution. We've always done what is needed to be done. And we've always, you know, gotten to that next stage, whatever that next stage may be. Acceptance of what is, ticking the boxes and knowing we tried our best. I saw him having a feeding tube when he was 2 years old as my biggest failure. And his GI doctor said, oh, no, you will see. You will love the feeding tube and you'll be so grateful for it. Give it some time. And about 4 or 5 months after he got it, I was like, oh, it was the greatest gift he ever had. I saw it as a huge failure on my part. I couldn't feed my child. That experience, getting through that experience, and anytime I see his feeding tube, it's like a reminder to me. I might think I'm failing, but really this is just his journey. This is what he needs. And thank God that we live in a time that we have modern medicine and that we can keep a child like my son alive with a feeding tube and with these special formulas. So, you know, when we hit these roadblocks, when something new occurs, when we're in a scary medical situation, I hold on to the truth that we have done these hard things together as a family, and we've made it through, whatever through means. Things that I have perceived as failures have not, in fact, been failures. So that's another truth that I can hold on to. And third is, I am a terrible predictor of the future. I suck at predicting the future. And so I know I'm really bad at predicting it. And so whenever my brain goes into the what ifs, I could just rest in the fact that I'm probably wrong. Like that worst case scenario, it's never happened. I guess at the time, the G tube was my worst case scenario. That did happen, but it really wasn't a worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is my son not being fed. That's a worst case scenario. So I think the perspective of this is part of his journey, just kind of zooming out a little bit. And, if I had not had that MRI, if we showed up at that morning that it was scheduled, I probably would have raged like I had never raged before, but we would have gone home. I would have probably gone on a long run, and we would have tried again at some point after I regrouped and got rid of the anger. It would get done.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be pretty or fun for anybody, but it would have happened. So if I couldn't find a doctor or specialist, we're heading to the East Coast in a couple months to see the specialist, because it turns out they're all on the East Coast. So that's where we're headed. If I hadn't found that person, we would have consulted with somebody here. It would happen eventually. What's meant to happen is going to happen. I'm personally not one who's throwing my destiny into fate necessarily. That's not really what I'm getting at. But I have the belief that we will get it done, whatever it is, on my son's timeline, whenever his body allows, or whenever, it doesn't have to be.
Well, I think what
now.
you're doing is you're acknowledging that you don't have control over everything. So what's going to happen is going to happen. And as coaches love the word and that doesn't mean you just sit and watch, right? Like you do all the things, you influence it. Of course you have impact. And in some cases, the result's still going to be the same as it would have been if you didn't, because we don't know what's going to happen. I want to jump back as we kind of come in for a landing, but you said something that I want to make sure the listeners really catch on to, because it is, if I could give any gift to a mom like us, it would be this. And it's those truths that you described. It's having those truths, because we try to find our peace in knowing the thing's going to be okay, in knowing if you're going to get the anesthesiologist to show up or whatever the thing is, right?
Yeah.
And we don't, right? And so it's like this anxiety-ridden swirl storm persists because we're trying to control so much that's not controllable. And giving ourselves these truths for you, like saying, what I know, I don't have any doubts of, is that I'll show up and I won't stop until we get what we need. You know that, right?
Right.
Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but you know that. And that gives you the ability to land on solid ground. Just kind of considering that the storm of anxiety is I'm picturing like a tornado. And if we don't teach ourselves, I'll say it differently, if we don't practice finding the places that we can land on solid ground, like you've described them as your truths, then it's like we're going to get swept up more easily. And it doesn't mean that we sometimes don't get looped up in that little tornado, right? We do. And we find our way back to the ground again. So yeah, you guys could even go back and listen to her describing this piece of being able to find those truths for herself. Okay. This conversation has been so rich and I so appreciate it. I want to make sure that we respect all of our listeners' time, but I want to hand it over to you. If there's anything that we didn't get to talk about or things that are just still on your mind that you want to share from your story, or just, anything that you would want to share with the listeners, what would you say?
Yeah. I think that for me, it was therapy, which led to meditation. And for some people, it's religion and it's their church or their synagogue. For some, it's family. And I think just finding an outlet and a place to process everything that's going on is so important. We do a lot on our own. It's I know in this episode, we're talking about not being so hyper responsible, but we're still really responsible. And I think being responsible of our children, even if you don't have a child with a disability, it's a lot. So when you add on disabilities, when you add on all these complications, these healthcare systems that are not working for you in a lot of different ways, it is just so important to be able to own it is hard. It is okay that it is hard. It's okay that I could sit here and chat about how I'm not feeling hyper responsible, but I will again, probably tomorrow, and then I'll remind myself. And I just think it's so important to have some sort of outlet and know that it's a cycle. We're working on it. We're working on ourselves as we're working on our relationship with our children and helping them grow. And I just think that we're all doing so much for our children, and having an outlet for ourselves is so much for ourselves too.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And it sounds like you have a really incredible therapist, and I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to just be so audacious to pitch a little bit about the Pathway to Peace program that, and, this is not necessarily your thing, but between September and October, we're starting a new cohort for the fall. And you've described the idea of having a place where you can sort this stuff out, where you can acknowledge that it's hard, where you can be supported by community, but also where you can kind of have someone push up against some of those things that are happening for you in a way that has you restory them, have it work a little bit better for you. Look at the ways that it's not serving you, this hyper responsibility, for instance, and work with it. I mentioned the word earlier, practice. So I want to pitch that, because if you hear Amy and you're like, wow, like sounds like she's got some stuff figured out. I agree. And also, we know it's not perfect. I would invite you to reach out to me to consider the Pathway to Peace program, because that's really what you've described. And yes, you're right. Support can happen a lot of different ways. So it's not the only way, but in my opinion, it's actually a really great way.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm so glad that I said that, because when you started speaking about it, I'm like, yes, of course. That is such a great resource that you provide. I think anybody who does it is so lucky to have you as their coach and to have that community.
Well,
and I'm not just saying that.
Much.
I truly believe that. So.
Well, thank you. That makes me feel really good. And again, thank you so much for sharing your authentic self with us today.
Thank you for having me.
We'll see you in the next episode. One more thing before we officially wrap up this show. Sometimes when I'm listening to podcasts, I have the experience of wanting more. I'm listening at the very end thinking, I sure wish that episode didn't end. I invite you, if you feel in any way the same way, I invite you to the Special Needs Mom podcast community, which is a free group that I host on Facebook, where we as a community of fellow moms who listen to this podcast and are experiencing life in similar shoes get to talk to one another, get to share stories, get to actually interact. I hope you'll consider joining. See you over there.